Brett, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
No worries, Chris. Thank you very much for hosting me.
You're welcome. Can you give myself and the audience a little bit of background about who you are and what you do?
Sure. So my name is Brett Winterford. I'm the Vice President of Okta Threat Intelligence. So Okta, as you probably know, is the world's identity company. What we focus on is helping folks in the workplace securely access all of their applications and data that they need to do their job. And then in the customer world, like when you sign in to a lot of customer services, you're often using our technology behind the scenes. So it's delivered as a cloud service. Naturally, because we're seeing a lot of the world's authentication events, that is people verifying their identity to access something, that is the front door for a lot of cyber attacks. So we have access to pretty extraordinary data that our customers give us consent to use in certain situations to, I guess, assess what threat actors are doing when they're going after a particular entity, when they're going after a particular set of targets. So we study a lot of things like phishing attacks and other forms of social engineering, large-scale credential stuffing and password spray attacks, other kind of attacks that involve, I guess, fraudulent identities. And one of my jobs is to make sure that we take those observations and make sure that our customers learn from it and adjust the configuration of their systems and adjust their security awareness programs for their staff to make sure that they are best protected against the latest, I guess, hijinks that threat actors are up to.
Gotcha. And is this something that you've always wanted to do, or did somewhere along the line someone tap your shoulder and say, "We need you to do this," or you lose your job, or what's the story of how you got to where you are?
It's a funny confluence of things that happen. So I used to write about cybersecurity as a journalist, similar to yourself, Chris, for many years here in Australia, and I edited magazines and wrote columns for our major newspapers all about cybersecurity before it was called cybersecurity. It used to just be called information security. And eventually I went into the field and started working in cybersecurity teams internally at companies. So one of the largest banks here in the region, I worked in their cybersecurity team, doing all kinds of things like advising government on cyber policy, working on security awareness programs, funding undergraduate degrees in cybersecurity at universities, all this kind of thing. Eventually found my way through the cybersecurity field to the point where I was regional chief security officer for Okta in our region until recently. Jumping back into threat intelligence was something that I guess it was an opportunity where I felt that our level of observation and some of the skills of our analysts weren't fully being realized in terms of outcomes for customers.
Mhm.
And so I kind of wanted to seize that opportunity and make sure that we were, maximizing the value of what we could observe.
Is working in threat intelligence the kind of thing that keeps you up at night? Do you get the phone calls in the middle of the night, the middle of the day, where you're kind of 24/7?
I think it's less stress than being the chief security officer, for sure. Anyone who works as a chief security officer does get the kind of phone calls that result in many days or weeks sometimes of lacking sleep. In my case, it's really only the time zone problem that
Yeah.
that results in me losing sleep. It's about being able to. It's about being comfortable with being able to release this information in a timely manner so that people can protect themselves uh, before the campaign is through. In other
Yeah.
words, when threat actors set up infrastructure these days, it doesn't take them very much investment or effort. And if you're going to try and disrupt that activity, you don't have a lot of time to get the message out to the relevant people to help protect them. So that's why it's great that there's podcasts such as yours, for example, that take people back to base
Yeah.
principles because you can't always be reactive at the end of the day. You have to have an underlying level of knowledge, a set of capabilities that are going to protect you because otherwise, the creativity of threat actors and their ability to adapt to the defenses that are put in front of them is pretty remarkable.
If you were to think back, let's say 5 or 10 years, you're talking about the speed at which you have the short time that you have to brief customers and make them aware of campaigns. How has that changed from 5 or 10 years ago till
Sure, I would have
today?
said that 5 or 10 years ago that configuring the infrastructure behind something like a phishing campaign that's targeted at a particular entity would have been one of the constraints on an attacker. Potentially some of the reconnaissance work they needed to do too, to really understand what is it that Chris Parker is going to respond
Yeah.
to. How can I be sure that I know enough about Chris that when I go after his organization in a really targeted way and I go after him, that I'm going to maximize my chances of success and minimize my I guess, chances of being caught. These days, the ability to rapidly create targeted phishing infrastructure is pretty phenomenal, and it's powered by artificial intelligence. We've discovered, and the ability to also create infrastructure that other attackers can use and rent from you is very common now. So there is a real, I guess, specialization of task in the cybercrime industry where everyone has their job and they excel at their job, and collectively they're very efficient. I think, yeah, that is no longer a constraint for an attacker now.
Mhm.
Reconnaissance using artificial intelligence is dramatically easier for them. And not only is AI being used to create more compelling lures and lures in different languages, but it's also being used to actually stand up the front end infrastructure of the phishing kits in seconds. So it literally takes seconds. And everything we've done, I guess, to enable kind of efficiency in the digital world
Yeah.
is something that can be abused by threat actors.
And like, where was that a few years ago? Like, how much time did it take attackers and the scammers to spin up their infrastructure? Is it sort of days, weeks, months, years to launch an attack? And is it now like minutes?
Yeah, I would say days and now minutes to hours. So yeah, it's not that it was really hard, but I guess if you're doing it at scale, but you're
Mhm.
still being highly targeted. So in other words, I want to go after lots of organizations, but I want every single attack to feel I want every single phishing page to look exactly like
Mhm.
what that user would typically sign into, for example. And I want the lure that we send to that particular target to really appeal to them in some way or be very contextual to their daily experience. The ability to do that now, highly targeted, highly effective, but still at large scale, is that's what's changed. It's gone from, as you say, days down to minutes.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I kind of think of uh, the old style phishing scam might be, hey, it's near Christmas or any holiday, depending on the country. We're going to send lots of emails pretending to be the local variation of Amazon or whatever the big retailer is, saying, hey, a fraudulent order's been placed, and oh my gosh, everyone has placed an order, so either expecting a package, or they're alarmed that their account got compromised. And so it was kind of like, well, if we just send it out to 100 million people, we're going to catch some. And now that the more I hear of these, scalable, highly targeted, what used to be, we're just going to spend hours and hours building a campaign to spearfish a particular CEO. Is that basically what they're doing for everybody now?
Yeah, it's a lot easier to be highly targeted. I mean, there is still a lot of large scale events out there, but I think the nature of I guess the nature of the cash out is different. So and also the ability to spin up new infrastructure quickly as existing infrastructure is identified means that you can have a perpetual campaign using different infrastructure over long periods of time. It isn't probably as seasonal as it used to
Yeah.
be, to your point. And Some of the most profound changes, I think, is if I think back earlier in my career at how much at certain kind of Eastern European groups that focused on banking malware. So that
Mhm.
is specifically malware designed um, to compromise a user's device and redirect payments um, from their online bank account. Um, we saw over time that as a lot of the world's largest banks got a lot better at detecting that malicious activity. A lot of those crews moved on to generic info-stealer malware. In other words, just trying to infect lots of the world's devices with generic malware that just steals passwords and session tokens out of the browser,
Yeah.
and then reselling those compromised accounts onto attackers of all stripes who had all kinds of different motivations. That was a really interesting change for me that there were some of the world's most capable actors used to be just focused on your online bank account. Now they're focused generally on just stealing credentials from your device to compromise a person in all kinds of different ways.
Yeah.
I mean, there are so many online services that we use now that are very critical to our lives compared to 10 or 15 years ago. And I think, the rise of cryptocurrency also changed the targeting a lot because now attackers can focus on holders of large cryptocurrency holdings and get a far bigger payday than when they were going after individuals' bank accounts in the past.
It was funny. I recently got a support ticket from someone saying, "Hey, do you think this is a scam?" And they had gotten a text message saying that their Coinbase account had been compromised and someone was using it to send or receive cryptocurrency with some crime syndicate. And so this person panics and calls the phone number that was in the text message and starts going back. And at some point, they realize, I don't think this something seems off here. And so why did they email me? I don't know, but they emailed me. And so the first thing I says, well, do you even have a Coinbase account? And they're like, no. And I'm like, well, why did you respond? Like, why did you respond? And like, it's interesting that people respond to crypto stuff even if they don't have any crypto accounts. And it was seriously like within a week of hearing about that, I got that text message as well. And it
Yeah.
was like, here's the case number. We need you to call Coinbase security. Here's the telephone number. And I'm like, oh, okay. If I had a Coinbase account, that might look reasonably convincing.
It sounds very like some campaigns that we investigated a few months ago. One particular campaign you can read about publicly was called the Poison Seed campaign, was the name that a different threat intelligence group gave to that campaign. But what was super interesting there was the adversary was aware of a lot of targets that did have a lot of cryptocurrency. It sounds like they also made some errors and sent it to people that had no holdings of cryptocurrency. But what was interesting there is you're starting to see that the total number of phishing campaigns that land in inboxes is actually stabilizing at a very, very high plateau. But for the last 12 months or so, around about the same number of phishing campaigns land in inboxes around the world. But what's super interesting is as email authentication has improved over time, the attackers are finding that they need to compromise a trusted sender
Yeah.
in order to deliver their scams. So for that particular campaign, there was a previous set of activity where those threat actors went after anyone who had access to I guess, a bulk email account. So
Yeah.
an account with a SendGrid or a Mailgun or one of these services where you can send emails to thousands of people and it's
Yeah.
coming from a trusted sender. And once they compromised all of those accounts, then they could send the messages that you're referring to. Also, sending obviously messages over SMS is a way that a lot of attackers have found that they can evade analysis from the email security firms in particular. So super interesting campaign in that now you're a target not just because you have something of value to an attacker, but you're also a target as an individual if you have access to a capability that they need
Yeah.
to be able to phish other users.
So I let's geek out for a moment here. So what you're talking about is having authenticated sender platforms, people that have uh, a website and needs to send out notifications when people subscribe to things or people the newsletters and things like that.
That's right.
And those platforms are set up with uh, SPF, DKIM, domain keys, and all those kind of things.
Mhm.
Uh, does that really affect? My experience is I get a ton of email that doesn't pass those things regardless. Does that really result in better deliverability for them?
It does. It does. And over time, we're seeing gradually the major webmail platforms introduce controls where it should be harder to get malicious messages into your inbox. I know that Google and Yahoo started insisting on bulk senders registering, with authenticating their mail some time ago. Microsoft's being a little slower, but I'm pretty sure in the last few months, they have also introduced some of those controls. Obviously, they've always been around in the corporate world. We've been
Yeah.
using SPF and DKIM, et cetera, for forever. But as that starts to roll out to the major consumer email platforms, it does become a consideration around deliverability for threat actors. So it's interesting. They have to optimize their email campaigns just as marketers do. And to your point, for any of your audience, you might be running a company where you think, I can't, why would I be part of a supply chain of an
Yeah.
attack? Like I'm running mowing services, but the fact is you have access to an email. If you have access to a bulk email capability that has good deliverability rates because you do have a great relationship with all of your customers, then your access to that account is of interest to threat actors.
Are they trying to go after that business's customers, or are they just trying to use that to send email to anybody and everybody?
And they typically they have their own. In my experience with these particular campaigns, they had their own downstream targets in mind. So not necessarily that particular customer base. No.
Are you seeing that where are you seeing where people are trying to exploit a company's infrastructure to go after the company's own customers?
Certainly, more so in the tech sector, for
Yeah.
example, that is far more prevalent. The point I was making earlier was,
Yeah.
you could be any generic industry, and your capabilities are still of interest to a threat actor. But certainly, yeah, supply chain attacks, abuse of trusted messaging platforms, very, very prevalent in the tech sector. So, any capability that a SaaS company has, for example, to send notifications, is something that threat actors will target. To give you an example, for the last few years, we've seen a lot of campaigns where attackers have abused Microsoft Teams
Yeah.
as a platform, because there is a capability to send messages in Teams from one tenant to another. So an attacker controlled tenant. So sometimes they'll take over the tenant of a small business that they've managed to compromise through password spray or some other kind of technique. Uh, if the ultimate target of who they're going after allows for external connections between those two teams tenants, they can then deliver their phishing lures via a Teams message, which is
Yeah.
going to be subject to less scrutiny
Yeah.
than over email. We had a really interesting attack recently, that one of our customers brought to our attention after we first of all identified some of the malicious domains being stood up, and we notified our customer, and then they tracked this campaign with us, and it was super interesting what the threat actors were doing. So what they'd done is they'd set up an attacker controlled Slack instance. So Slack being similar to Microsoft
Yeah.
Teams, and they had created this Slack instance to appear as though it was set up by the CEO of the firm they were targeting. So they pulled the profile information of that
Yeah.
CEO, the profile photo, the title, the name, etc. And so it appeared as though your CEO was inviting you to this new Slack channel because you've performed really well. Maybe you're going to go to President's Club because you sold the most widgets, whatever it is. some kind of enticement to go and join this
Yeah.
particular Slack tenant. And what was super interesting about these attacks was you didn't necessarily have to fall for it. You didn't have to accept the invitation to the Slack tenant to be delivered a phishing lure. What they managed to do was find a way to smuggle phishing links that were obfuscated so they looked like they were directed to one particular benign site, but they were actually being redirected to a malicious phishing site. They managed to, I guess, smuggle those into the notifications sent to the user before they'd even accepted the invitation.
Oh, wow.
So, in other words, when you invite someone to join a Slack tenant, that identity is created in Slack, and then you can send a DM to that individual that hasn't a direct message to that individual who hasn't even yet joined the Slack tenant, and it will send it to their inbox. Again, now that domain is a notifications at .slack.com, whatever the domain is not something that your corporate IT team is necessarily going to block because
Yeah.
there are legitimate notifications from that domain that are going to come to your email inbox. So, very clever way of getting around again some of the authentication methods that security teams rely on, and some of the signals that users rely on when they're facing when they're trying to detect malicious activity. So. The other thing we loved about tracking this campaign is that they explicitly asked the attackers explicitly asked the targeted user not to use Okta FastPass when they were signing in, which is as good an advertisement for our passwordless phishing resistant authentication than we've ever seen. So we blew that up into a news story to basically say attackers are telling everyone not to use Okta. That means you should probably use
I
Okta.
love it. I love it. So you were talking about it getting more and more difficult to spot the scabs,
Mm.
with generative AI producing better grammar, mimicking a brand's tone, even probably doing language translation to a language that the scammer's not familiar with. How is the consumer able, like, what should consumers be doing to try to spot these new tactics? Because it's you asked me 5-10 years ago, oh yeah, look for bad grammar, look for weird formatting of phone numbers, look for it's Amazon's logo from 20 years ago. It's not your
Mhm.
bank's. It's Bank America, not Bank America. They've got a typo in the bank name. All of those kind of things are out the window with because of generative AI.
It's it's disappointing to say it, but judging by some of the lures that we see on a daily basis, it is getting very, very hard to distinguish between a phishing lure and a real sign-in page. And it's very difficult to then to educate people on what to look out for. Naturally, looking at the top level domain still is predominantly the best advice
Yeah,
you can give someone is that they expect if they expect to receive communication to be directed to a specific domain and they aren't. Now, not everyone's going to remember the top level domain of the service providers that they use, which is why when you first start interacting with a service provider, it might be a good idea to download their app. Um, you are then relying, of course, on the fact that the app ecosystem is not allowing fraudulent apps to be registered. But generally speaking, once you've authenticated with a legitimate app of a service provider, um, there is a form of trust created between your device and the servers of that service provider, which means that you don't have to authenticate very frequently. More often than not, you're just verifying your identity to the device.
yeah.
And the device is authenticating to the service on your behalf. So I think it's incumbent upon service providers to make sure they're really, really crystal clear on under what circumstances they would ask their customers to take a specific action, because all we can really rely on at this point is intent. What am I being asked to do? Is it out of the ordinary? Is it not something I would typically expect to be asked by this particular service provider? Um, and this is why a lot of folks like me, but also a lot of folks like the uh, the cybersecurity agencies of most countries are trying to encourage people to use passkeys
Yeah.
because With a passkey, there isn't a secret to hand over anymore. And you basically, at the point of enrollment with a service, you create a trusted relationship between your device or a security key and that service, and there is no password or OTP to hand over to an attacker who's trying to phish you. Um, I understand that this is a very new technology that people are only just getting used to, but I think we're going to have to get a lot more used to it, given what generative AI is delivering to attackers.
And I'll make the point for organizations that are rolling out passkeys, don't do what one of my vendors did, and that every time I tried to sign in without using passkeys, I had to say, no, I don't want to do passkeys about 5 times before it would let me in every single time I tried to log into their platform.
Yeah,
For about 3 months, I was about ready to switch providers because they were so persistent about trying to get me to do something that at the time was not the appropriate choice for me.
it's very, it is very, it's very difficult because it's easy to sit up on my perch and say, judging by what I can see in the threat landscape, you should all be using
Yeah.
passkeys. The reality of getting everyone onto a very new form of authentication. We've been using username and password for a little while now. Most of us are very familiar with that. It took a long time to get people to understand the need to use multi-factor authentication.
And still, it's a challenge for lots of
Yeah.
people.
But now we're getting to a point where what I'm trying to convince people is if they can make that initial investment in enrollment in passkeys, and some of the management of those passkeys can be a little bit complex. If you get over that hurdle, what you get from there is not only, phishing resistant protection, but it'll take you 3 to 5 seconds to sign in to
Yeah.
your service provider, and it used to take you 30 seconds. So there is some initial pain, but the promise down the line is every subsequent authentication event, you're saving yourself 25 seconds. That's kind of how I try and sell it to people.
Yeah. Because everything about the existing authentication is slowing people down, and that is some people's hesitancy to even do 2FA is, well, now I've got an extra step I've got to do, and I need that extra 20 seconds of my life back.
I dread to think of how many times I've clicked the forgot password button. And I'm someone who works in this field, like I use password managers. But password managers can sometimes be complex across different browsers on different devices, and you end up thinking the fastest path to resolving this is to press forgot password and go through another password reset. And I look forward to a future where we'll have to click that button far less frequently.
I love it. I love it. So I think we are seeing, and maybe you can confirm or deny or suggest otherwise, is most of uh, the delivery mechanisms moving outside of email now?
Oh, very much so. I mean, I think email will always be a delivery method of note for a broad set of actors, but SMS, I think, has become so important to adversaries. It's easily spoofable. It doesn't tend to go through the same gateways that
Yeah.
are looking for signs of inauthenticity. Like I said, other trusted messaging channels like over-the-top messages like WhatsApp are very, very common now. Social media accounts, very common for scams. Um, and as I said, also just abuse of, what should be trustworthy services where threat actors manage to spin up their own tenants in multi-tenant services and attack from that location. I think we're seeing more and more often that simply, sending out tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of email messages is fairly crude compared to the tools available to threat actors today.
Yeah. What's your thought on people's concern about kind of AI voice cloning and identity impersonation in terms of, well, I got a phone call and I think it's from my kid, the typical the grandparent scam. It's the grandkid. Oh, I'm in the I'm in jail and I'm in a different country. I need money. Like, are you seeing more of that targeting corporate, or is that still kind of relegated to kind of one-offs targeting grandparents?
No, definitely. We're seeing the same thing in the corporate world. The most common one that you probably swat away every week is the impersonation of your CEO, given that there is a huge corpus out there, generally speaking, of chief executives that speak at their, quarterly earnings,
Yeah.
etc. So there's a huge corpus of voice print that attackers can develop on. So they have sufficient amount of input to create a very compelling output. So yeah, there are WhatsApp messages with audio attached all the time being sent to, I mean, our staff of all of our customers, where their CEO is impersonated and instructing them to do certain things. Um, so voice is easily is something that can be uh, easily, trivially kind of cloned. We are also seeing obviously deepfake video as well
Yep.
being used in things like the DPRK, the North Korean fraudulent IT worker scheme. We study very closely. Their scheme relies on a lot of other use of AI beside deepfakes, but occasionally you'll see a deepfake overlay used, and where there is some reason for that individual to change their appearance. Um, and It's still a little glitchy. You can, if we educate people and tell them, give them various methods of understanding whether they are potentially interviewing someone who is not who they say they are. But one of the easy things to do from a deepfake perspective is simply have them wave their hand in front of their face, because it nearly always glitches in a way that makes it clear that there is a deepfake overlay.
Wait, you mean
I
there's six fingers suddenly?
Yeah, the blurring effect seems it does look very, very strange. But I still think it's the the progress that technology has made over the past, what, 6 months has
Yeah.
been uh, I mean, remarkable, scary. Um, uh, I'd like to think that I would never be tricked using through someone using a deep fake, but I don't know if I could say that in a month or two from now. It's starting, the technology just keeps improving, and the disappointing thing, I guess, is a lot of these advancements in AI to me, given asymmetrical advantage to the attacker,
Yeah.
and not the defender, not the target. Um, as a person who might be on the receiving end of a scam, the tools you have available and accessible to you aren't necessarily scaling as fast as the tools that are available to
Yeah.
attackers. Because at the end of the day, AI is great at creating synthetic things.
Yeah.
Um, and and so, yeah, we're going to see more of that, unquestionably. And the advice we have to give people has to change alongside it. And again, we focus very, very much on taking in multiple signals, and also, having methods of anchoring your trust in something. So, a cryptographic relationship between
Mhm.
your device and a service is something you can trust more readily than someone who's calling you out of the blue.
So, like, with all these changes, we used to, we used to have the, 10 years or 5 years ago, maybe even the red flags of, well, if the person won't get on a FaceTime chat with you, then they're a scammer. If they're on a dating app and they're trying to get you to move off the platform, that's a red flag. If the grammar of the emails, bad, it's a red flag. Uh, some of the automated telephone calls, there's telltale signs of, geez, the same background noise repeating over and over and over in this conversation. That's kind of odd. And kind of those sort of uh, media specific red flags are really starting to go away with AI. What is the critical thinking pieces that we need to teach instead?
I wouldn't say we should stop teaching those,
Yeah.
because most of the things you just mentioned, we still see,
Yeah.
even with AI. I think it's great. I mean, it's because it's teaching people how to be cynical
Yeah.
about these approaches, right? Like, being asked to move off one platform to another is a really clear signal. Well, someone approaches you on LinkedIn and then they want you to move off to a mobile messenger service.
Yeah.
Why? Why? What is it that they don't want to expose in messaging on LinkedIn, which is looking for certain kind of scams? So I think it's still great advice. I guess the difficult thing for a regular person is just to understand, you know, when would my service provider call me and ask me to take an action?
Yeah.
And how would they verify their identity to me? They're always asking me to verify my identity to them, but how do they prove that they are legitimate to me? And so I think as much as we can, continue to impart this knowledge as you are on how to pick those scams, we also need to get a lot better, those of us who are working for service providers, in setting really, really clear expectations and creating you know, trusted methods of communication that people can rely on,
Hmm.
um, and not leaving it 100% up to the end user of a service to be able to discern what's malicious and what's benign. Um, because, as I said, the tradecraft of adversaries keeps uh, it's adapting and it's improving at a rate that we can't expect people's knowledge to keep up with. So
Yeah.
yeah, every conversation helps.
Yeah. I always like, I think now kind of my general, the advice that works today, and hopefully it'll work for at least a few more years, is you should always be suspicious of any unsolicited communication.
Yep.
If you didn't ask your bank to call you and you get a call from your bank, be concerned that it's not really your bank. If you get a call from your grandson and you weren't really expecting a call from your grandson and it's something odd, trust that it seems odd. It's
Yeah.
really, I hate to tell people to be cynical or to be suspicious,
Mm.
but I think there's a little bit of, we're now in a state where we have to have at least some baseline cynicism or distrust of what's happening around us.
And we need to have the tools to say, okay, well, a bank calls me, I should be able to say to them, well, I want you to verify that you're my bank. If I log into my bank now in my banking app and there's an inbox, whatever the matter is that you're addressing me on the phone, I should find that matter in that inbox.
Yeah.
In other words, I should be able to look to some alternate channel to verify that the matter that you're calling me about is legitimate. And I think that's the skill we've got to teach people. And also, but again, there's two sides to this. The bank has to make that available. If they're going to
Yes.
call a user and say, take an action, then they have to also provide the user an alternate channel of communication to verify that the approach is legitimate. And for the most part, obviously, banks don't call
Yeah.
their users for that reason. But outside of banks, there's plenty of other reasons why people have to be contacted. The most difficult thing our customers have to do sometimes is things like mass password resets. And it's very easy to reset the passwords of tens of thousands of users. It's very difficult to convince them that you really do need them to reset their password and that you're not a scammer,
Yeah.
because scammers are impersonating IT and security teams. They know that is a trust anchor that they can abuse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are, do you see campaigns where someone says, "Hey, you need to reset your password. We're going to send you to a phishing site. We want you to enter your old password
Mhm.
and then reset it
Yeah.
with a new one, and then use that to get the password." Is that kind of a classic?
Absolutely. That's one of the classics is there's a problem with a factor of some kind, whether it's a password, whether it's, the SMS OTP you've set up, you know, uh, an authenticator app that you've got installed on your phone. You've got a problem with it. Um, Please go and type in your old, authenticate, and
We'll
We'll
reset it.
set you up with a new one. We'll reset it. Yeah, it's resetting your credentials is a common scam. So again, when you have to legitimately convince a user to reset their credentials, that is a part of responding to a cyber attack that a lot of organizations don't realize that that's where the complexity and cost comes in, is in having to communicate to your users that they need to take an action. Um, and that can be very, very tricky because I know that if I get a message saying reset my credential, I tend to be quite cynical about it.
Yeah, I'm the same way. It's like, and usually it's accompanied by a notice of we take your security and privacy very seriously.
Of course.
Like, did you? Yes, it is a really challenging kind of cat and mouse game between security and the scammers. Do you think the scammers and the adversaries have the upper hand at the moment because of AI, and that it's just a matter of time before the tides turn?
I think that they have, as I said, an asymmetrical advantage at the moment. Attackers are leaning on AI to create a lot more synthetic material that is highly targeted to, to who they're going after, and it's imposing far less cost on them. At the same time, I try and remain optimistic. I mean, in the corporate environment, I see the adoption of phishing resistant passwordless authentication rocketing every year. I think we saw it go from 2% to 6% to 13% to higher. Like it's doubling at that kind of rate that makes me think that, we're really, really making ourselves harder targets for threat actors. We're starting to see them focus on the enrollment and recovery processes of the
Yeah,
of the life cycle. So that suggests that they're not defeating, the general sign in with phishing. So they're having to be more creative. If attackers are getting on the phone in a corporate environment, that they are exposing themselves to more risk, and that's a good thing. Every
yeah,
time an attacker has to do something that's risky for them, that is more likely to result in them getting caught and going to prison, then I'm happy. Um, in the consumer context, we really need for service providers to do more. And I'm not just talking about passkey enrollment, I'm talking about being able to get a gauge on what a user's normal pattern of behavior is,
yeah,
and then being able to take appropriate action in line when their pattern of behavior deviates significantly. Um, I think there's a lot more we can do around things like breach password protection, that is not allowing users to create passwords that we know have been compromised in other external events. Um, there's a lot we can do to identify synthetic traffic, the fraudulent creation of accounts, that kind of thing. Um, I'm seeing that level of maturity ratchet up through our customers over time, and that's what gives me is what gives me hope, is seeing those capabilities used. And every now and then you just get those little signals from various threat actor groups that you target closely, that they're having to adapt and
yeah,
change, and that means that we're creating friction and cost, and that's super, super important. I'm also a big advocate for some of the kind of cross-industry groups we work with, for example, the World Economic Forum's uh, collaborative work with Interpol and Europol and others, where we're bringing down entire scam
yeah.
farms and working across industry bodies with law enforcement to kind of address some of those scams that I don't get to have much impact on in my day-to-day job. But there are people out there that have, that with the right people in the room, it's
Yeah.
amazing what can be done. So I remain optimistic that maybe as well with artificial intelligence, it might even create a generation of users of digital services who are inherently more cynical about any approach that comes to them, because they've grown up in a world in which they are less trusting of a lot of the messages that come to them.
Yeah. And so as we wrap up here, two questions. Are there any particular resources that you guys have that are kind of consumer facing that give a kind of a broad overview of the threat landscape?
Sure. If you go to Okta's newsroom and look for stories tagged Okta Threat Intelligence, there's a great deal, many resources there where we've, I guess, scratched away at a particular campaign and tried to educate people about what we can learn from those campaigns. So yeah, if you head along to Okta's newsroom, you'll see that. The one that was particularly interesting from an AI perspective involved the abuse of a service called V0. So if you search for that, it's very interesting to see just again how quickly attackers are adapting to generative AI and using it to create not just compelling phishing campaigns, but the entire infrastructure behind their phishing operations.
Gotcha. And any parting advice, one or two actions that consumers should take if they haven't already taken to reduce their risk, reduce their
You know what I'm going to
footprint, their
say.
profile.
You know what I'm going to say. I'm going to say go to your service providers that you use regularly and see if they're offering passkeys and start experimenting. Again, that initial upfront investment in time is going to save you a lot of time in the future. It doesn't mean that you have to throw away all of your existing techniques, your password managers, etc. This is going to be a transition, but you'll feel a lot more comfortable if you're signing in using passkeys or signing in using the official apps of your service providers. And if you're using those methods, then being asked to access resources via any other method is going to seem a lot more unusual to you and help you to differentiate between the benign and the malicious.
I love it. And if you're a platform provider, you should always
Yes.
provide an in-app confirmation of messages.
Yes, I love that. Yes, an in-app inbox basically. Just make sure that anything you're going to communicate out to your customers, they have a way of authenticating to a trusted app where they
Yeah,
can see the reason why you've had that outreach to them. And just having a separate trusted method of communication is essential, in my opinion.
I love it. Brett, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
No worries. Thanks for having me, Chris. I enjoyed the conversation.